Hi, I'm Marjorie Healy, and welcome to another episode of Behind the White Picket Fence, where life is both messy and beautiful. Today, I have Annabelle Sproule, who is one of my clients and has been for the past 5 years. She's also the mother of twins. It's my third episode filming with a mom of twins, so clearly we bond together and are united by that joined experience. And here we're just going to talk about life, motherhood, what it's like raising children, what it's like working with me, where nothing is off the table. We just had a quick chat prior to you coming on, and we are going to just get juicy, we said. Today's a juicy conversation. So I hope our listeners are ready. Welcome.
Thank you.
It's just supposed to be raw, easy, natural. The whole point is just to get people to listen to this and to start their own conversation. That's my goal. I'd like to be a conversation starter.
Sounds good.
Okay, so we were just chatting about like where is the best place to start? And when we were chatting, we were saying it's really hard to tease it apart. Like what is a parent coach and how do they work with someone? And you said something so beautiful. You said it's not really parent coaching. You said it is about what? Do you remember?
Yes. And I have this also definition because since we started working together, I took my own parent coaching training. So
Right.
then, yeah. So then, when I initially began the parent coaching journey with you, you think you have this child with this behavior. You're like, oh, my kids have hit the terrible twos. What do I do? I don't know how to control this behavior. I don't know what to do. And then you learn that it actually has very little to do with the children and it has everything to do with you as the parent. And the reason why, as our teacher said, the reason why it is called parent coaching and not parenting coaching is because it's about coaching the parent to find their path and to find their peace and their balance so that they can show up for their kids in the way that the kids need in that time. And so, yeah, that's been the journey for me. And that's always been my journey as a parent and to show up for my kids in the way that they need me to be.
Yeah, and your best possible version. I always say to parents, if you can work through all of your own past, all of the things that are showing up as, they're kind of showing up through your kids are having this behavior and how you respond is very indicative of how you are feeling in general as a human being. Not just a mother, but as a person who's also been raised by parents and has their own ideologies about what this is supposed to look like or what they thought this would look like. But I had shivers when you said that because it is so hard to explain to parents who come on to hear that the behavior your kids are presenting and what might make you reach out or have that initial call could be, like you said, we're going through the terrible twos. I need tools, help me. And then they get into it and they realize, oh gosh, I love the when the realization hits. For some, it's the first call. For some, it's the 15th. They're like, this is about
Yeah.
me.
When you realize that the real problem is not that your kids have hit the terrible twos and are having big feelings. Your real problem is that every time your kid screams, you become incredibly emotionally dysregulated because it's traumatic for you because of something that's happened. And I see that in my work as a midwife too. From the moment a child is born, I see some parents whose child cries, which is their only way of communicating from birth, triggering the parent and triggering a trauma response in the parent. And that is really common and really hard. I think it might be one of the hardest things about being a parent is not what our kids do, but how it makes us feel in our bodies and how our bodies become dysregulated and how we don't know what to do about that. That is really, like, for me, the crux of parenting.
Yeah, I 100% agree. I love that you say that because I always say to some of my clients, depending on where you're at, is where I can meet you. And I'll always come to that place for you. But my goal is I use the analogy of bring you to the deep end. I want to take you out of the shallow end. I want you to invite you to do the work lovingly. And that's hard because we're going to dig into why that's showing up for you. Why are you so triggered? And some of that's from, well, all of that's from your past
Yeah.
and you come as you said to solve a sleep problem or an eating problem or an emotional problem, and you realize, oh wait, my child's just a mirror for how I'm doing.
Or they're doing these like completely developmentally appropriate behaviors. And you're like, oh, this isn't working for me. And then it's like, oh, well, it's actually really developmentally appropriate and normal. And so what do we do to get you through this stage that's really sticky and hard?
Yeah. Well, that's a really good point, because something else that comes up all the time is they'll call me and they'll say, well, I can't get my child to stay at the table. And then they'll say, well, how old is your child? They'll say 4. And I'll say, well, movement is completely and 100% integral to development. So for a 4-year-old to sit still for a long period of time would be counterintuitive to that development piece. So we have to set them up for success. So some of it, what I'm saying is, essentially, is a lot of it is education. If I
Yeah.
educate you on where they are, emotionally in their development, physically in their development, neurologically in their development, then we can start to go, oh, so that's just their experience, and I just have to be their loving witness. I don't necessarily have to change
Mm-hmm.
them, right?
Yes. Just like that Khalil Gibran quote.
Oh, what is it?
Well, it's let us be the bows for which our child fly or something. It's like
Oh,
we are we're simply the container for these beings, these plants to grow. We're not meant to shape them. We're not meant to change them. We're just meant to be there and hold them through their own process of growth and be the
right.
safe place for them. And
Yeah.
that we don't recognize, which has been the biggest, hardest thing for me as a parent, is that when I disassociate because I'm triggered, or when I become dysregulated and go into fight or flight and maybe yell because I'm triggered, I'm not able to be that safe place for them. And that's my only job, is to do that. And that is the hardest thing for me is I want to do all the other stuff. I'm A type, right? I'm like, well, I'm a schedules and I'm this and I can brush your teeth every day and I can make sure you have a well-balanced diet. I can make sure you drink water. I can potty train. I can get you to school, and all those things that we consider to be really important. But then the emotional container, the safety, that is my biggest struggle as a parent, and that is the thing that's been the hardest for me. And it's also the most important thing we can do.
Right. And I think that's where all the work lies. Is
Yeah.
it's really, how do we just be their witness instead of looking at their behavior and having that triggered reaction? How do we look at their behavior and just say, I see you. I see you having a hard time. I see you managing disappointment. I see you managing anger. I see you managing fear, sadness, overexcitement, or whatever it is. It's not necessarily what I would consider an uncomfortable emotion. It's all emotions. I see you having a big emotion, and I will wait here for you, beside you, and I will hold that space for you to get through that to the other side. And it's hard. You want to jump in. I always say parents, they want to jump in, they want to lock and load on the roller coaster beside them, they want to join them. And then you have two people kind of riding the highs and the
Yeah.
lows of
Yeah.
an emotional child.
Yeah.
It's really tricky. It's
It's
really tricky. Yeah. Well, if you had to describe, because I think you sort of already have, but would you add anything to what you think your role is as their parent?
I think to be open and curious to, not knowing what kind of child you're going to have, what kind of person is inside of them. And I know for me, I'm ADHD and undiagnosed until 3 years ago. And, a lot of the times, the parenting books, especially, they talk about how to parent neurotypical children. And you and I have talked a little bit about this, is like, we don't know until later what our kid's brain is. we just don't know. We won't know until they're much, much older who they are, how their brain works, how their chemistry is balanced. And so how can we raise our children with the possibility that they might have different brains than a neurotypical brain?
Yeah.
And so how do we do it in a gentle way? And I'm not just talking about gentle parenting, but like, you know, so many times I have said to myself or to my children, like, your reaction is really inappropriate for, mostly I say to myself, like, this reaction is like too much, like, for the situation, right? And so then therefore judging it, like, it's too much and it's like, calm down, right? But like,
Right.
we don't know until later why that is. And we won't know, maybe, maybe I didn't teach my kids good enough coping mechanisms when they were little, or maybe I over supported them, or maybe they have autism and I won't know until later, right? Or ADHD like I did. And I know what was really cool in my home, I had a mom with ADHD also. She didn't know, but I do think there was some really there was space for a lot of the stuff that went on. There was that unconditional love there. I felt that at home. I didn't feel in the school system because it was the
Mhm.
80s, and we didn't really understand still behavioral stuff in children.
Right.
Not teachers did. A lot of them still did. But yeah, it's like, how do we raise our kids with the generosity of spirit that we can't really know why they are acting the way they are until maybe later, like next year or 5 years or 10 years, or maybe when they're adult, they'll say, when I was a kid, this used to go on for me, and I've just been exploring it in therapy. And like, yeah, and this used to go on for me, and I felt really misunderstood in that. So,
Right.
yeah, so how do we be open and generous? And this is the work that you and I do, still have boundaries about what's appropriate. And how to
So
protect
hard.
yourself in that, right?
Yeah.
Because like when you are a gentle parent, they either really slippery slope into also getting completely annihilated in the process. So,
Yeah, no, I hear you, and it is so. And I'm listening to you, and I think I'll touch on a couple points that you said. One is, what it we're really just diving into this concept of neurodiversity and what it looks like in the classroom. And I love what you said about just getting curious. Like, we should just get curious about our kids. One of the things I see in the classroom that I speak to is when they're sitting at a desk, and let's say it's grade 2, and they're given a math sheet with a few math problems on it. And of course, the children's minds wander, and the teacher will come back and direct them back to task. In fact, they've been teaching mindfulness, right? Like, oh, when you hear your mind wander, call it back, which is a beautiful skill. But I always say, why don't you watch them through their daydream? Just observe. And when they're finished their daydream, ask them, what were you dreaming about? I saw you daydreaming. Can you share with me what you were dreaming about? Indulge their daydream, and then put them back to task, because that's the boundary piece you talk about, right? Like, have your emotion. I want to give you space for your emotion, but there are some boundaries around what that can look like. For
Mhm.
example, I always say to parents, they can't hurt you. Hurting, biting, pinching, pulling out hair. I mean, I get some really big descriptions of meltdowns. I've had parents send me videos. I've had, all sorts of different things. And you're right. Where do we separate giving them that space and allowing them, but also not allowing them to, do things that are harmful to themselves or to you while they're regulating themselves.
Yeah.
It's tricky. It's really tricky.
Maybe.
I think that's one of the hardest conversations we've had, because you're right. Like, what is appropriate? What's not appropriate? Are we going to completely know? Our children's brains are developing from 0 until, 24 or 27 years of age.
Mhm.
And they are different, and we should be really curious about who they are and how they operate, right?
Yeah.
One of the things we've often talked about too is, how do we set them up for success? If one of the things we do on here is become a little bit more educated on what they're capable of at different ages. But even if they're not following the typical, progressions, let's say.
Yeah.
And so what I say to you is, okay, Annabelle, what do you see that they can do? Where if we had to get a baseline, who cares about what the typical is?
Mhm.
We have to get a baseline, and then how can we give them a little launch pad from there? How do we build the scaffolding,
Mhm.
right? For them and for you.
Mhm.
How do we as parents apply levels in which they can jump from and be successful?
Yeah.
Not to say that they're not going to fail, but we also don't want to set them up for what is not accomplishable. What if we give them something that's too big,
Yeah. Yeah,
right?
like when we recently transitioned the parenting schedule to 2 weeks and 2 weeks.
Right,
That yeah, that, that was before you and I were working together recently, but it was an example of probably setting them up for something that was too big, you
right,
know? Wasn't the right it wasn't the right place for success, and created just such a host of issues
right,
because of that. So, like, if you could look back and take it back, my instincts were in that time, like, I don't think this is going to feel good for them. I have a feeling this is going to be really hard for them. But then, it's like, well, why don't you try it and see? And that is a part of parenting that's so important, is trial and
right.
error. Like,
Trial and error.
that
Yeah.
is what we do. But then, you also have to make your educated guesses too, and try to, like, prevent suffering when possible. And so, yeah, so we tried that, the 2-week schedule, and then all these other anxieties that had been dormant for years rose: separation anxiety, school refusal, like so many things that, could you attribute it to the 2 weeks and 2 weeks? Maybe, maybe not. But, like, it's yeah, you can find yourself in hot water when you try to yeah, when you try to put them in a situation where it's not going to be poised for success. And
Right.
then you're sometimes backpedaling at that point. We're still suffering the consequences of that, right? We're still having separation anxiety at drop-offs, still having issues with transition to their dad's house. So, like, yeah,
It's
it's
really hard.
it's
Yeah, and we didn't prompt our listeners. Both of us are divorced, and both of us are raising our kids, in a shared situation. I mean, mine are much older, so I don't have a scheduled drop off. But for you, your kids do transition between two homes, and it adds a layer because one of the things kids do struggle with is transition. And you're right, if we don't do it mindfully and talk about, I hear this word a lot, and actually I'm doing a talk in a couple of weeks on this topic of conscious parenting, and someone said, well, what is it? And I really think it's just staying attuned.
mhm,
It's making decisions in line with, if we forgot about development for a second, if we just sat back and we looked at our children and we looked at who they were in this moment in time and what other things they've been able to do in the past and where they found their success. And if we were going to make a change, what would be the best way? Again, we don't need to carve a perfect path for our children because we want them to know what it's like to uh, garner some resilience and to be able to learn to handle some, what could be perceived as an uncomfortable situation, and find out that they're capable. So we don't want to make it so that it's perfect for them because that would be unattainable, first of all. But we do want to give them the best opportunity to see themselves as competent, successful little beings. And you're right, if you looked at that schedule and you looked at where they were, you would
mhm.
say, okay. And I think you, when we talked about it, you even said, we're going to try this new parenting schedule, but I don't know. You were such a willing participant, but you did say, and I think we should touch on this. You did say intuitively, you said, knowing my girls, and your girls are 7 now, knowing my girls and knowing who they are thus far, I don't feel good about this. This feels a little bit off to me. So
Mhm.
can you talk to me about how you feel about that parental intuition and where you've seen it show up for you, or even just what your thoughts are on it? Because I do this a lot with my clients. We get so busy reading the books, we get so busy listening to others, we get so busy, hearing a teacher's, I've been working for 40 years with kids, I know, and but nobody knows your kids like you know your kids. So what are your thoughts on that?
Well, it's really hard. It's so hard to acknowledge our intuition in the context of having a two-family home and having two parents, right? Like, if you have an intuition about something and then the other parent says, well, I also do, like, who's right and who should trump the other? Just because I'm the mother, like, I don't think that's fair. And so, um, yeah, it's really hard. Like, that's where the trial and error comes in, and that's where the generosity towards the other parent comes in too. Like, I also have to say, okay, well, this is my, I believe that this is not going to work, but
Right.
I will try my best and I will do everything I can to make this work because this is what you would like to try. Um, and and yet at the same time, when it is not working, I'm going to bring it back as my kid's advocate and say this doesn't seem to be working.
Right.
But I'm not going to do it in a way like I told you so,
Right.
So if
Wouldn't that be so
you
tempting?
that. Yeah, but like that's not generous co-parenting. That's not
No,
teamwork. That's not good.
no.
Yeah, that's not working together. So it's like there is that place for that intuition. And when it's not impacting another person's life, like of course we should listen to our intuition. But then there's also, I have a lot of anxiety. And so how do you get in touch with your intuition and parse it apart from your anxiety? Like maybe I was also anxious about being away from my kids for 2 weeks. How do I separate those things, right? Like
Um,
it's so tricky. And that's where having an outside person is so helpful, right? Because as soon as I got reached out to you and we sat down and had the conversation, I was able to see, oh, yeah, that was my intuition that I was in touch with back in January that was telling me this wasn't a good idea. And okay, so it wasn't mine. It wasn't all in my head. Like as women, we're so often accused of, oh, it's all in your head. Oh, you're making things up. You're overly emotional, right? That's the whole thing. And it's easy to wonder about that. So then when you can bring in an outsider, someone who knows you or someone who's just a professional in the field of child development,
right.
then you can just get things straight and not have to wonder. And we have a family counselor that we see, and whilst she also wanted to be generous about the situation, she said, it can't hurt to try. Once we did go through it for 6 months and try it didn't go well, she did say, well, at the age that your children are at, a 1 week is usually the limit for each house. Like that's kind of like the developmentally appropriate time frame for like one house to the next. So, she acknowledged that too. And yeah, probably no harm done in the end, but it's yeah. How do you be in touch with your intuition, separate from your anxiety? It's so hard. It's
So hard. I think you make a really valid point, and I think sometimes when you have that third party listener, that does help until you reconnect with it again. But you're
Mhm.
right, as it pops up and it bubbles up, and you say, "Is that my gut feel, or is that fear? Is that fear
Yeah.
and anxiety?" And they are hard to tease apart. I know when I was going through my divorce, I felt the same. I could not at times, at highly emotional times, tease it apart. So one of the ways that I dealt with that, and I think that helps in my shoes as a coach, and as a parent and youth coach sitting on this side, is that I vowed to myself never to make a decision in an emotional time. So when things were feeling that way and it was all rising up and I was feeling very uncomfortable and I wasn't sure what it was, I'd say, I think I'm going to need a couple of days to think about this. And
Mhm.
then it just bought me a window of time to let those emotions, simmer down enough to connect to that and that kind of all knowing that sits inside of us as parents, because there's a lot of parental noise. there's a lot. Um,
Mhm.
and and I love is that, and I say this all the time, like one of the kind of qualities that I love about my clients is willingness.
Mhm.
And when I listen to you recount that story of making that decision and having everyone kind of, your parent counselor involved with you guys and helping you do that, you're willing. You're saying, okay, well, you know what, I'm going to give this a shot, because that's another way too. I don't know, I can't separate the fear, it all feels emotional, it all feels overwhelming, I can't calm the systems down long enough to know. So you know what, I'm going to just give it a go, I'm going to try and see. And that willingness helps you in a million ways. It helps you in this process, you and I talking. It helps, with raising your girls, being able to give them the space to also try things. I agree with you, and in hindsight, I think the other counselor also agreed that that was a long time for 7-year olds. But at least you can say, you know what, we tried it,
Mhm.
and everyone can. Because I think you also hit on something that's very true too, as moms, is that the other way we can't connect to our intuition is because we're told we are overly emotional, or we're reacting too much, or we're being, I hear this all the time, we're being paranoid. You're being paranoid about that. And I was like, well, it is that paranoia, or is that just me saying I have a funny feeling and it's speaking to me and I'd like to honor
Yeah.
it, right? Yeah,
Yeah.
as much as we honor our kids' feelings, we have to honor our
Yeah,
own.
totally. And
Yeah.
you mentioned something that I think is so important that we touch on, because for women who go through divorce with children or separation with children, um, every I don't I know it happened to me and it probably happened to you. Um, you go through, especially if you've been a primary parent, or like a really you've been staying home or done, more of the sort of like hands-on parenting, um,
Right.
early years. The instinct is to think, how are my kids going to be without me? How could we possibly be separated? And I went through this, it was so hard when we separated my children. It was, I think, like the day after their fourth birthday that we decided to separate. And I I couldn't imagine being apart from them. And I couldn't imagine how that could be okay for them.
Right.
And so it's so tricky. And like you were saying, it's an emotional time. It's such an emotional time. Like, but I do know it's been almost 3 years since our separation. And um, I do know that it's so important that children have a father, and especially if it's a willing father. If you get separated and there's a dad who is abusive, or who is not interested in the children,
Yeah.
like, by all means, you
Yeah.
know, the kids can stay with you, you should do that.
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah, but if there is a willing dad, and even if he has flaws, which at the time when I was separating, I thought he was the only person with flaws in
Right.
our situation. I thought he was the only parent with flaws. I thought I was perfect. It's common, very common when you first get divorced. You
That's
know, I have a few issues, but really you're the one with the
that's
stuff.
right. Yeah. You've
Yeah,
got the bigger issues here.
yeah, you have
Yeah.
the way bigger
Yeah.
issues. So then that fuels your thing more of like, well, then I should be the one to raise the children because I'm the one who's got my shit together, right? So like the more years that pass in our separation, the more personal work I do, the more I recognize, wow, like we both have our own complex stuff that we are working on, but that we can both show up still and be parents to these children. And I'm so grateful to the people that supported me along that journey to walk through that really scary, scary time of letting go of control around my kids and letting them be with their dad one-on-one.
Right.
And they didn't have much of a relationship with him before we separated, because we were spent all our time together. They saw me as the primary. They came to me for everything. And
Oh,
now they have this relationship with him, which is beyond my wildest dreams for them. and their father's wildest dreams too. Like it's so deep and intimate and special, and the adventures they go on. And so like, I just wanted to go back to that, that if there's anyone listening who's in the early stages of separation, it's you can't know until you go through it, just like all parts of parenting.
Right.
Um, you can't know that it's going to be okay, and it doesn't feel like it's going to be okay.
Yeah, well, so much of life can feel that way, right? When things get messy and the waters get tumultuous and you feel you can't see your way out. And often I say when you can't hold the faith, it's okay to give it to someone else to hold it for you. And I think at times as a coach, I've held that faith for parents. I've said, I know right now you don't know, but I know. And I literally was just at a gathering on Saturday, and a lot of my clients are also my friends, which is such an interesting journey. And I think they are so brave to come and open up so openly with me. But there was a mom there who was having a particularly hard time. And she looked at me and she said, I'm having a really hard time. I think I'm going to come to you. And I said, absolutely. And her eyes filled. And I said, you need to know one thing. You need to know that together we can get through this, that
Mhm.
together we can do this. And but in that moment for her, it feels like she can't hold her own faith. Her
Mhm.
faith in the situation is completely rocked. And kids and parents go through some big things. I think people underestimate what's happening because we don't share. We're not, this is why it's called behind the white picket fence, Annabelle. This is the whole thing, because
Yeah.
people don't share what's going on behind the white picket fence. They only want to show us, and Instagram and Facebook don't help. Like, let me show you the award my child just won. Let me show you the beautiful trip we're going on. Let me show you their first day of school, their last day of school. Now, some people have gone in and made very humorous attempts at teasing what happens in parenting, and I think a lot of us relate to that because we're like, oh, it is funny. I mean, there is some very funny moments, but there's also some very serious things that happen. And
Mm.
my job I see is to hold the faith, to guide. I'm just a conduit to your own growth for what you need for your family and your kids. I don't do the work. I ask the questions. I get curious,
Mhm.
really curious. I want to know. And then I'll ask you something that will hopefully broaden your lens. But while we're going through it, a big piece of my job is to say, you've got this. I'll shoulder to shoulder this relationship with you until you see yourself on the other side.
Yeah.
Right. And I think that's so, I mean, people have done that for me. I had my own coach going through my rough waters.
Well, and people do that with God.
Oh,
And I feel so jealous in a lot of ways of people who grew up with religion,
right.
with this really strong spiritual connection to
Mhm.
their God, um, as they see it. And
Mhm.
yeah, it's for those of us who didn't grow up with that and
Right.
instead grew up thinking that we had to be our own gods, that we were the ones controlling our lives, that we were the ones who were going to make things happen for us, no one else. And then we couldn't trust in anyone else, a higher power, or even our parents
Right.
to make things happen. Yeah, like when you become a parent and you don't have a trust in, be it the universe or be it God or be it yourself or be it anyone else, like it's so hard because then you can end up in that controlling state of like, well, then I have to do everything, right? I can't trust in anything else or anyone else. And that's where you get yourself in a lot of trouble is
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
in
Well, let's
that
talk
way.
about that control. Because, first of all, you're right. I think, regardless of when I look at what keeps us regulated, we talk about this all the time, right? When I say, what are the pillars of regulation for us as parents and for our children? And it's sleep, right? It's good nutrition, it's hydration, it's a form of movement. And
Mhm.
then I have this fifth one, and it is spirituality.
Mhm.
Where is your higher being for you, whatever that looks like. I have no judgment or even pre-existing notion on five. For some clients, I can't even list five.
Yeah,
And
and
it
that could
was
be that I say would be true for me most of my life. Like, it was
sad.
just so far from the reality of the fabric in which I was raised, and it's something that as I get older, I'm working on and
Right.
feel it here and there, but it's not a constant for me. And that's because of the way I was raised, the way I grew up, the way I grew up really fearful, really anxious and not trusting. And so like it's, when I'm in my happy place, I'm like, oh, trust the universe 100%. But then
Right.
I am like, oh, I can't trust anything. Like I have to, I have to do this.
It's so funny. It's like, wait a second, universe, this wasn't, and yet it's a teacher, right? I mean, I just had this conversation with someone, and they said, you hear this all the time, life's not fair. And I said, oh, actually, I wholeheartedly disagree. Life couldn't be more fair. And what we get served in front of us on our path is our ability to decide, okay, I've been given this, and it is either feels uncomfortable or comfortable. And when it feels uncomfortable, we're very quick to say it's not fair. And yet, really, I say when life serves you something uncomfortable, it's an opportunity. It's a true opportunity, however you go through it. But not having pillar number 5, I think makes it more difficult to do that. And I think you brought in the concept, and maybe we'll leave this as our last concept, but it's a big one, is control. When things get uncomfortable, regardless how we view them, whether we see it as an opportunity or as we see it as a giant, unfortunate event, and that is going to bring great sadness. And I'm not saying, let me preface, that events that don't require some element of processing the feeling of sadness or any of the feelings, but we can get into a position of, I want to be in control. And I see parents visit control 1 or 2 times in parenting, either in early childhood or in the teenage years.
Mm.
They either get it with, I can't make my child sleep, eat, or use the bathroom, right, or potty train. And if they were successful in controlling those 3 things and battling your child,
It's coming for you on the other end. It's
you
coming for you on the other end. Yeah.
what happens when you can't control whether a 16-year-old shows
Well,
up?
no, but that creates that. So
Right,
when we create obedient children in
right,
early childhood through fear tactics and through
yes.
punishments, let me tell you, you are in for a treat come the adolescent years because yeah. Oh my gosh, yes, it is.
Right? It's
Yeah.
coming. Yeah. So this
Yeah.
is a really good, I mean, I almost feel like we could do a whole podcast on this one issue, right? Of us using parental strategies to control our children versus teaching them autonomy. I always say there's a huge difference between control and autonomy. And I've written about it in my book, and we will definitely get back on here and talk about it. But if we were to lightly touch on this, what are your thoughts on control as a mom? Like, how do you set your kids up to become autonomous versus feeling like you have to do what I say in the moment I say it? I'm going to say jump, and you're supposed to say how high, and you're under my rule. Where does it show up for you?
Well, I am not that parent, but I am so controlling in so many other ways.
Right.
Like I think when the kids were younger, and this is this was a real mistake. My children never once experienced hunger or thirst
Mm,
until they entered kindergarten. And even then, they were so old that
right.
I feel they're almost 7, and I don't know that they know what that feels like because when they were little, I was constantly tracking their intake, forcing water, forcing snacks in an effort to avoid meltdowns for my own benefit, not
Right.
for theirs. That was so that I wouldn't have to deal with a double twin tantrum meltdown while we're out and about or even at home. So
Right.
I was so
Because those are big. Those are big moments. We both know that. I have a moment where I was at a mall and one twin was rolling on the ground one way and the other twin was rolling on the ground the other. And I wanted to just sit down and cry too.
It's survival. It is survival. Absolutely. But then I have these children that when they're at school, that we spend a lot of time apart now. And, I still don't trust that they know when to feed and drink themselves. And so when they're at school, of course, I'm releasing ultimate control. I pack the stuff and hope for the best. And then the moment they walk through my door, you better believe that I am on them like like whatever. And I'm like, snacks, water, pee, get going before you do anything fun. And let me tell you, it does not always land well. And I wish I could just let go of that. Maybe I'll start practicing it more of just like, when they come home from school, it's a very tough transition home, right? Who knows what they've been through during the day. And then they come in and you do this and you do that, and you cannot do this until you've done that. And like, it doesn't land well. And I think I need to switch gears on that one. Yeah, but it's a constant. So I don't try to control their behavior, but I do try to control like all the things that I've been doing since they were little to set them up for success, right? What they eat, what they drink, when they go to bed, those things. And so, but there will come a time when I'm going to need to start letting that go. And those are the times that are hard. I don't know when that time is.
Right. And I think, there's a distinction between setting them up for success and building autonomy. And like I
Mhm.
give the example with food, because you give a good example. That's one of the ones I give. Early on, we get this forcing our kids to eat, because you're right. We know that it's a pillar and a big meltdown is difficult. And transitions are hard. I transitions from school to home are hard because they have been holding it together all day long, and then they get into a very safe space with someone that they know loves them unconditionally, and then they can start to let it all out, and we don't always know where it's coming from. We don't know what happened all day at school, but that shift. And Montessori does this so beautifully. They put snack out, and there's no snack time.
Mm.
There's no snack time. The snack is out, and children can go and help themselves to snack when they feel that little feeling in their tummy of, oh, I'm actually feeling hungry, or I'm feeling thirsty, and they make that connection because that's autonomy.
Yeah.
Yeah. And boundary is, well, we're gonna maybe eat, the boundary would be snacks are eaten at the table. That's where an example of a boundary could come in, right? And then Montessori has the same. You can have snack, but it's at this table so that they
Yeah.
don't have food and sticky hands everywhere. But it's tricky for parents. It really is. I remember seeing a mom at our school walk, at the end of the day, and hand her child the lunchbox at 3:30 that had unfinished food in it, and the daughter would open it up and have to sit, and the mom would stand there while she ate it. And
That sounds like me. I could see myself doing.
and years later we talked about it, and she said, I never should have done that. And and it's not my job to help someone unless they've asked for help. I can't put myself on them. But I remember watching it and thinking, oh gosh, is she hungry?
Mm,
Is this nourishment that is
mhm.
required by the body, and is she starting to learn autonomy? And all those tricky times, like, when exactly do we teach this skill? And I think the earlier the better, but it is really tricky. It's really tricky because teaching autonomy, all it typically means, through the teaching process of it, there's going to be some big emotions.
Yes, there's gonna be learning that comes, right?
Yeah.
Like, they have to they have to go through the choice to not eat, to then find the dysregulation, to then miss out on something that they really wanted to do. And then you have to give them the opportunity to connect the dots, because they don't necessarily connect the dots. Like, it's all so new, right? Of like, I didn't eat, and then I was at the beach, and then I had a big meltdown because I couldn't paddle the thing, and then I missed out on that, and then I had to go, how do you
How do
it's
you
a
do that?
it takes
And yeah.
multiple times to learn, and we want them as parents, we wanna skip through the hard stuff, and we want them to learn the lessons, but we don't wanna deal with the messy middle, because it's so hard to see our children suffering when we know it's preventable, but then
Right.
yeah, but then how will they learn otherwise?
But Annabelle, you just said it so beautifully. I think that do all sorts of things as parents to skip the learning, right? We bribe, we use fear, we use control, we do everything to skip the process. We really, really do, because it's messy and it's difficult. Yet, you're right, if we're going to do an excellent job of raising regulated human beings who are in connection with their need, we need to, not all at once, right? We never want to do anything all at once, one lesson at a time. And yes, that lesson will take multiple goes. As adults, we have multiple goes with lessons.
Yeah.
They're usually larger.
Yeah.
But
The
we get
stakes are higher.
oh, the stakes are higher. We get life lessons all day long. And we're like, haven't I done this one already? I'm sure I've done this lesson. And oh, but here it is showing up again. So you're right. It is hard. We have to say things like, do you think you just might have been hungry when you were at the beach? Do you think that was what was going on?
Mhm.
Did you just need to eat? And then we start to help them connect those dots. But that's really, you're right, it's messy. It
Yep.
it's
And
volatile.
who are we to say that the stakes are higher for grown-ups than for kids? Because that's another judgment on our part, saying that our business and our stuff is more important than theirs. Because in their world, the things that happen for them are very high stakes. Those are really big deals for them.
Yeah.
And so, like, for us to say, oh, yeah, the stakes are high. When you make mistakes as an adult, it's a really big deal. It's like, well, actually, like it feels the same as a kid. For their worlds, it's the big deal.
It's a big deal. It's
Mhm.
true. And I think that's a really brings us back to honoring their process, where as their witness, they're going through something and they're crying about, this is a famous one I see on Instagram all the time, that their banana broke. And you're like,
Oh, yeah, I've had that one. I've taped bananas together with masking tape a number of times. Let me tell you.
because their banana broke and their world is falling apart. And it has nothing to do with the banana. It has everything to do with all the things that led to that moment in time. But it's easy to make fun of their process. And I do think that we should keep a sense of humor about parenting. I really do. I think a good sense of humor is healthy. But you're right. If we look at their world, when a child has a tantrum because they wanted the orange cup and we've given them the blue cup, I may not change that for them, because it's okay to process disappointment. But what I am going to do is honor that they're disappointed. That's for sure. And
Mhm.
honor that does feel in their world like a really big deal,
Yeah.
and it feels heavy and weighted, and it's a challenging moment for them. So part of you wants to laugh or make fun of it. I can't believe we're doing this over a cup, but we are, and we're
Mhm.
in this moment. And as I said, we both know it's not about the cup, or it's not about the banana, but it is about honoring their emotional process
Yeah.
and giving them the space. Oh my goodness, we've touched on so much, but I also feel like we can come back and do this again, because we could go deeper on many of these topics. And as I said, one of the things I just love about you is the willingness. You've got this incredible willingness to say, like, I'm screwing up, I'm doing great, I'm learning, I'm doing all the elements, but you're willing to do all of this. And
Yeah.
it's so neat. It's so
Yeah.
neat. Is there anything else you wanted to add before we sign off, or something burning you wanted to share? I don't want to cut you off in any way.
No, I can't think of anything.
All right, but we'll come back here.
Yeah, yeah. I feel like we could take little side roads in so many directions. We didn't talk at all about the not that we should start a new topic, but we
Yeah.
didn't talk about the whole basis of parent coaching. And I mean, we talked about emotional regulation, but like how to achieve that for ourselves. How
Mm,
do we how do we show up for our kids? Like what do we do to create, like how do we take care of ourselves so that we
yeah.
can show up for them?
Yeah, so we
Is
kind
that
of, I
yeah.
think that parent coaching is one way. You know, when you come and do this, that you take the time and set aside the time to learn about your past, yourself, what might be
Yes.
something off.
Yes.
It's one way like it's just one. I recognize that my role is one avenue in,
Yes.
but would you agree kind of because you're both a client and you've also done the training yourself in the same industry and actually the same school. We went to the same school. We had the same guidance and the same information. So, you know, speaking to you and going through this experience, would you not agree that this is probably a start anyways to opening the door for healing yourself so that you can show up for your kids?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Yes. And you mentioned it at one point, just like the 5 different ways that we can take care of ourselves. But like, you know, we just touched on it so briefly, but without, you know, getting enough sleep and making time for yourself
Mhm.
to take care of your body physically, however you choose to do it, like we don't have a chance of showing up for our kids, even if we have the best of intentions. And I can tell you, for all the mistakes that I've made, I have always had the best intentions. And yet
Yeah,
I have screwed up so much.
we
So
are.
much. I know, but like really so much. And so intentions only take you so far. You
Right.
actually have to do something about them,
Yeah.
right? Like, and so for me, it's been, different medications, like maybe getting medicated from ADHD. That's been recently helpful. But like even this past 3-week period, I had my girls for 3 weeks while their dad was away working, and I didn't exercise at all. Not at
Right.
all. Even though I have a live-in nanny who is fantastic and they're bonded to, and she is there, and I could have gone and taken care of myself, and I chose not to
Oh,
because I wanted to be with my kids. I had every excuse. I was tired. I just couldn't bear it. And guess how I was doing at the end of that 3-week period? Not good. No, not good. And like, how do I keep having to do this over and over and over?
this is my lesson.
The lesson, I'm like, come on,
Not
that
again. Yeah.
it's a marathon. It's not a race. Like you gotta take care of yourself every day. And whenever my kids come home, it's the same. I come at it I'm like, yes, I got this. I'm so strong. I'm like in the zone. And then somehow I managed to lose myself in that time with them and
Yeah.
forget to take care of myself.
I think self-care is a funny one too, because we look at self-care as, oh, going to the spa or going away for the weekend with our girlfriends. And those things are, or going on a date night if you are married and you have a great connection with your spouse and fulfilling that connection too, which is incredibly important. All these things are important. And we can do anything, we just can't do everything. So you're
Mm.
trying to find these slices of time to take care of yourself. And while a lot of those things are incredibly important in the self-care realm, I think we forget to make it a little bit more simplistic than that. Like just making sure we fill a glass of water and put it on the counter, that we go for a walk. I'm not saying you need to go to a gym and do this crazy workout, but we do have to move our bodies because movement makes us feel good, and
Mhm.
our kids too. So, I think we can find this concept of self-care sort of got blown up to this self-indulgent, make sure you're treating yourself, make sure you're looking after yourself. And yes, but I'm asking for it in the way that we stay regulated, right?
Yeah.
In small ways that we stay regulated. And sleep's tricky too, because as a parent, you don't get a lot of solitary time. You don't get a lot of time where someone, especially when they're little, is physically not on your body or touching your body. So I think at night sometimes we stay up quite late because we finally have this little window. And yet, in order to be okay the next day, we've got to go down. We've got to lay down and go to sleep. And it's hard. It's tricky business. It's easy, more simple ways that I'd like to invite self-care, but you're right. They take some governing of our intentions.
Yeah.
And that's challenging too, right? Well, we will come back. We will do more of this. This is
Mhm.
did. Thank you so much. I love that I think when I hit the record button, all of a sudden everybody, myself included, we put on this, okay, we're on. And I think as the conversation got going, we both relaxed and it was nice and flowed. And I'm really excited for our listeners to hear this because you are such a gem inside and out. I love you so much. It's been such an honor to be part of your journey, and I'm forever humbled that you let me in, as it truly is, it's a joy. I always say that if my clients knew how much they give to me, I think, I sometimes get confused in that role that they think I am the giver. And I never thought I'd be in a role where I receive more than I give. And you've been part of that journey. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Marjorie.
All right, we'll do it again. Listeners, have a great day. And if you want to know more, have questions, definitely reach out. Both Annabelle and I would probably be honored to answer questions. Okay, have a great day.
Thank you. Bye, Marjorie.
Bye.